Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are your follow-up act to the match last night. Thanks so much for turning up so early in the morning. My name's Amy Boscombe. I'm the commissioning editor for drama at BBC Children's, and I'm so pleased to be chairing this really exciting session, Can I Write for Video Games? To start us off, you will notice something slightly different about the panel, but we'll start with introductions, please. Maya.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm the screenwriter and narrative designer for The Pirate Queen with Lucy Liu. It's a historical narrative adventure, and it's voiced and EP'd by Lucy Liu, which was, thrilling for us when she came on board. This is my first game that I've worked on, and it's been an amazing learning curve coming from film and TV, and I'm excited to share more about that with you.
Brilliant, thank you. Moving on to Finbar.
Hi, I'm Finbar Hawkins. I'm a writing director working at Aardman. I've been at Aardman for well over 10 years now. The last 5 years or so I've been writing for Wallace and Gromit. There was a project called The Big Fix-Up, which was a transmedia project we did a few years ago. And then most recently, The Grand Getaway, which is our first VR adventure with Wallace and Gromit. And that launched just before Christmas last year. And there you go.
Fantastic. Now to our glitch in the system. Hi.
Hello, I am not Jenna Jovie. I'm Trevor Klein. I'm the producer of the session. I've jumped on Jenna, sends her apologies. She came to Sheffield and is a bit unwell, so I thought, that's all right, I'll ask her to just record what she was going to say, but she's lost her voice. So she spent yesterday in bed writing up some responses for me, so I'm her avatar for today, doing my best Jenna impression. Anything very smart that is said is all her. Anything insane is my misunderstanding. So, hello, I'm Jenna Jovie. I am a screenwriter in TV and film, but also for games, and more specifically, I normally work as a narrative designer. Previously, I, Jenna Jovie, trained as an architect and then became a storyteller. I'm also involved with the National Film and Television School and work with screenwriters there, especially those with an interest in games. I've worked across games that are indie level, so smaller games, and also larger AA and AAA titles, including Ghostbusters, Rise of the Ghost Lord, which you just saw, and also an upcoming narrative puzzle adventure, Summerhill. As well as a AAA project that I, Jenna Jovie, can't talk about.
Excellent, thank you very much. I actually really like this. I think it's going to add a little frisson. I'm very happy about it. So we've got broadly, we've got three different topics that we're going to talk about. We're also going to break those up, and I'm going to ask our lovely panel just to talk about games that have moved them over the years, both as a child and as an adult. I think we're going to start with some stats. I mean, I think that, the key thing about this, it feels like a really exciting opportunity for all the writers here who are maybe used to hearing no 96% of the time. Here's a really amazing opportunity where there could be a chance to play and explore other areas. Some great stats here. I won't go through them all, but I mean, over 90% of children aged between 3 and 17 are playing video games on mobiles and tablets. And 8 to 15 who use the internet at home. The number one activity is schoolwork, but close behind at number 2 is playing games. And of course, video games have been moving on to TV and film as well, as we know. We've got lots of crossovers, some brilliant images here, Fallout, Last of Us, Mario, Sonic. Fair to say maybe the quality has been questionable in previously, but these are now actually, primo projects, aren't they? Which is really encouraging. So, so hopefully this is going to be a really positive session for everybody here. Let's move on to our first topic. And I guess the key difference, for someone like me who's worked in legacy media and TV drama, is the key difference is perhaps agency. I think Jenna had some really interesting thoughts on that.
Sure. Hello. Yes, so I, Jenna Jovie, So as screenwriters, we are used to describing what the audience hear, see and feel as they move through a story. But when it comes to games, the audience becomes the player. So we also have to think about what the player is doing at any given point in time on top of everything else. So the doing bit is the magic, really, because it, as Amy mentioned, it gives the player agency. And agency means that hopefully the player can begin to build a real connection with their character, the story and the world they inhabit. If you get it right, it can make for deeper immersion, and for Jenna's 5-year World of Warcraft addiction, if you get it right, you really get it right. So it's about how that doing intersects with narrative. So the player character is normally a good place to start thinking about this. If there's combat, how does that character fight? How do we make that consistent with our character and our world? Are we a knife-wielding assassin, a goose honking aggressively at people, or kids splashing in puddles and throwing frisbees to defeat imaginary enemies, and so on?
Very good point, Jenna. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Maya, if I can come to you, what does agency mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you want to empower the player to feel like they are in control of the story. Obviously, you have created something already. Like, there's only so many things you can do. The story has to progress a certain way. But still, you want to make them feel like their actions, the order they choose to do something in, it has an impact on the world, and they are in control in some way in the story. So our game is like a historical action adventure. It's based on a true story of a Chinese sex worker who became the leader of a massive pirate fleet. And we really wanted to really put the player in that world. So you take on her as a character. So you are voiced by Lucy Liu, and you are this amazing woman who, over the course of one night, essentially moves through the fleet and, you know, fights her way out of puzzles. We avoided combat, so it really was about demonstrating your intellect and your connection to the people and why you would be the best leader. So we, both myself and director Eloise Singer, come from film and TV. So this was like a huge learning curve because it's not only gaming, it's also VR. And I think in VR, you just cannot overestimate how quickly people get bored and they just want to pick up everything, throw stuff around and see like what they can do. So we found that the best way to tell a story and include lots of agency is to really build a narrative around interactions, like have objects that you pick up, deliver you sound bites, informing you about the world and the plot and like what's at stake. And then each action that you take opens up a new path. And that's the way that we found was just gave you possibilities to build an emotional arc. Because I think, again, what's really wonderful about VR is when you step into the player's shoes, there is literally no separation. You are them. And I think especially when you're doing anything with a cultural difference, like you are playing, in our case, a Chinese woman from the early 19th century, it doesn't matter who you are because you just are her. You are in her position. There is no sort of like barrier where you feel like, oh, I don't know if I really get what she's going through because it's just you. So I think it's a really great shortcut to empathy.
Brilliant. And Finbar, what does that mean for you? Obviously, you've been working on the big Wallace and Gromit game recently. What does agency mean for you?
Well, it's very similar to everything that Maya's said, really. And we both worked on VR pieces. And we were chatting before this. This was our first adventure in VR. I come from script writing background and writing novels, things like that, and also writing for apps and games at Aardman. So the Big Fix-Up was the first kind of venture into that. It was a transmedia setup. With the Grand Getaway, we started at... we always had this notion, once we got the scenario away, of, right, they're going to go back in the rocket. Everybody loves the rocket. They're going back. They think they're going on holiday. So there's the general kind of structure for it, and something, as invariably happens in Wallace Gromit Adventures, something goes wrong. And they spin off. No spoilers, I can tell you, but they go to Mars. So right from the get-go, we thought we were very excited about the potential for the VR medium, thinking, fantastic, you can be Wallace and you can be Gromit. And we can jump between those. We can give the player agency through those different characters, and they can experience it. They can be silly as Wallace. They can be adventurous and kind of doing things as Gromit. But very, very early in those discussions, when we were getting very excited about it, it was pointed out to us that, yes, also you'd need to be able to see Wallace and Gromit. They are a duo. They are the Batman and Robin, essentially. And you need to be able to see them having their own agency through the story. So it became apparent that we needed a third character. in that. Unfortunately, Nick had a early short film that he wanted because he's a golf nut. Who knew that that Nick Park's a golf nut? And he had designed an AutoCAD concept for a short film that never saw the light of day. And we thought, okay, this is interesting, because it did tie into the fact that they were going off on their holidays to Bognor Regis, and then Wallace was going to get up to all sorts of holiday shenanigans, golfing being one of them. So we started thinking, okay, this is going to give us our in terms of agency. And we built up a lot of layers around this character, so that it would be able to give you that viewpoint. You're in an almost kind of theatrical setting, right? We had 12 chapters over the adventure, and there were going to be all sorts of puzzles, things to do in order to progress that chapter and get out of that. You were going to be part of the team in that respect, so it's very important that you had that bond with them. But also you had your own progression there as well. So we started to layer in, as you started to understand who you were, you literally start that scene. We shamelessly stole from RoboCop. Wallace and Gromit has lots of filmic references in it, so that very first bit in the introduction, we have the kind of boot-up sequence, and you can see, very importantly, Wallace and Gromit in that scene. It's the iconic dining room, rather. So right from the get-go, we're saying, you are something else, you are something different, and obviously then taking people through those tutorials, learning the mechanics of what you need to do. And then tied to that, from a story point of view, is making those mechanics silly. It's a Wallace and Gromit adventure. It has to have a contraption-based lunacy about it, and so you're learning that in those very first scenes.
So talk to me about the learning then. So there are various different skills, procedures that you need the users to get across.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I've been watching, playing Maya's amazing, beautiful game, which you should all buy and download and enjoy. And there's similar things going on in that, in terms of you land in a scenario, you need to coax out that very first steps of what you're doing, literally the mechanics of the controls, the simplicity of it, and how that is then also bonding itself to the narrative.
So that's got to be part of the narrative. You're not sending them off and doing kind of some separate module or anything. That's part of it.
No, so games tend to start, and you have like a little tutorial level where you're introduced to the core mechanics of the game. In our case, you sort of get a little cutscene telling you this is the context, and then you are on a pontoon, and you basically have to just learn how to move around. There's a great difference in like movement in terms of like smooth movement and teleportation in VR. And it's really important you decide that really early on, because it can lead to really horrible motion sickness.
Oh, God.
And then you get introduced to the main things, which are like picking something up, looking at it from all angles. You get to learn rowing and climbing, which are the embodied things that you do in our game. There's also like a throwing mechanic. But essentially, it's really important to introduce the player to the main forms of engagement they'll be doing throughout the game. And as you progress, you can sort of layer on things like additional usage that you can, like, maybe you can throw something at an object and like trigger a ladder to fall down or something like that. But essentially you introduce them to the basics and then you build on that step by step. And I think narratively, it's really important to know what these mechanics will be, because it's really fun to think, how can I sort of write a scenario and give it stakes that a player does something at the right time and they have to think of it. You know, you can definitely construct puzzles around that, but knowing it and sort of being familiar with how it feels like.
Yeah.
I think that is also for the writers such a fun way of working on a story, because when you're doing screen stuff, you just see the finished product a lot of the time. You don't get to sort of see it at each stage and adapt on the fly. And I think when you're working in games, what's really wonderful is that you have a much closer connection to the artists and the programmers, but also you get to play the builds. And if something's not fun, and that's the most important thing, you just got to scrap it and think of something else. And I think that's been such a privilege.
So is that like the sort of drafting process then, as you iterate and you go through? So talk to me about that, Finbar. What's that like for you as a creator?
It's fun and it's terrifying. You start with the same. You start with a whiteboard, blank pieces of paper. You slowly but then progress to wonderful things like Gravity Sketch, where you're in a 3D environment, almost like a 3D whiteboard, where you can build things and test things really quickly. but fun is the heart of it. Fun is because you're going to be asking people to be in an hour-plus experience, especially if they're in a VR context where they might need to take breaks and come back to it, everything else. So you need to make sure that the steel thread of that mechanic that is tied to the narrative is something they're going to want to do consistently and come back to. So the way that I say solved. We got there eventually. We had all sorts of ideas. You break things, you trash things. Is that it comes back to the silliness. The heart of Wallace and Gromit is a contraption-based madness. So you are a contraption in it. In order to grab something, if I were to grab that bottle, your arms would extend, or you could go to the other side of the room and grab things. That seemed fun. You had this kind of in and out kind of effect. And because he's a caddy, he would be able to fire balls. You learn that in your first. So in order to do that, you'd naturally, of course, in a Wallace and Gromit adventure, you swallow it.
Sure.
And you would, for want of a better term, spit the golf ball to another location. But we got originally it was throwing and it wasn't working. We couldn't get it to work. It would take some time to do that right. And then we stumbled upon, what if we ate a golf ball because it's silly? And then that ties later to when you meet some alien babies, and they are very taken with you. They kind of bond with you. So you've got your own journey emotively there. And what you end up doing as you're playing with them is that you have to swallow a baby alien. Sorry, go with me on this. And then they are giggling. You're made out of metal, so there's no kind of organics involved.
Yeah.
Giggling as they go inside your body, and then you fire them out and might hit a puzzle, and that continues all the way through the game. So
amazing.
But I say it took a while to get to that point. It took some months for us to.
So what's the difference then between, say, writing comedy for TV and writing for games? Is it the same mechanism that you're going through?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I am, again, being a newbie to VR, and I'd worked on games and things like that before, and an AR setup, and then into VR. There were traditional things involved, like, yes, we tried to storyboard, and then we kind of junked that. That was learning how we were doing that, and then we go into something like Gravity Sketch as a 3D tool. But also, we had to write a scene, knowing that a scene's going to happen and that we wanted our characters to be in that situation. So I would be, before we'd worked out or finalised the puzzles per se, I would be rewriting scripts around that to get the beats of Wallace and Gromit and how they would interact in each scene. And that would at least give us a framework to be able to then, as we were working with the other parts of our brains on puzzles. If that makes sense?
I think, so for us, there is definitely less comedy than Wallace and Gromit. But I think we try to get in some humor just to really bring the world alive, again, because it's historical and it's set in the South China Sea. I'm half Chinese, by the way, so that cultural aspect was really important for me to get right and have it be authentic to the time period as much as possible while still making sure it works as a game. So we try to just add lines, like incidental lines in the environment. Like I really wanted to get in a lot of Cantonese as well, and just have some, funny lines. Like in The Witcher, one of my favorite moments is you walk past a guard and he farts and laughs about that. Like just, I remember that. It's great, and I really wanted to have like that sort of moment, that type of moment happen. But also, I think you have to think about interactions a player might do, which are just insane. So at one point, you find a bottle of poison, and one of the things you can do is to drink it yourself. So then you write a line that might never trigger, but essentially if you do decide to drink the poison, it's like, why would anyone drink the poison? So you have to think about opportunities where you can cater to the player doing something that's just completely, nonsensical.
That's interesting. So you've got less control there, I suppose, because if you're writing for screen, you can think about the structure, the rhythm, the grammar, how it's going to land.
I think
there's less control of that.
Yes, but I think it gives you a different type of control, which is that you're leaving crumbs for the player to find. And I think that is such a different experience for the audience, because this is something that you discovered. Like, other people might play the whole game and they might not have the same experience as you, so it feels special in a different way.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and we did very similar things. So again, tying it to who you are and your agency, as if you are this contraption, is that again, no spoilers, but that you find out that there's a prophecy. So there's all sorts of kind of alien runes being left around in each scene. So you have a scanning mechanic in there as well. If you needed to teleport, again, ridiculous. You kind of hold it up, so you've got almost like binoculars with your controllers. So you could see a port point. But actually that was a clue to you searching the environment, and you might see things on walls that would be a rune.
You're leaving clues for people.
Yeah, and that was a story that we wrote as a kind of back end story that all joins up as like a jigsaw, and you can scan them in. And there's another contraption at your home base on Mars called the Blueprintomatic, which was, again, I'll throw to things like Minority Report. I wanted it all kind of ridiculous and over the top. But the runes go into that, so you can kind of, you can see how the story also kind of relates to you. So there was,
Can I just make a comment really briefly? Because so we didn't have the budget to do characters, so you don't really see figures, you sort of see silhouettes. But I think thinking about the way that you essentially don't write dialogue, you write a lot of you did, but I didn't. And I feel like a lot of games you don't necessarily have access to have like big exchanges. So again, what we sort of did to bring in a really famous historical person is to have them act as a hint system. And I think, again, that's a different way you can write dialogue and you can bring flavor and color into a world, because you want to direct the player, to do the things they need to do. And if someone gets stuck, you want to, again, write things that aren't patronizing. You want to sort of hit that balance between taking them by the hand completely and just giving them the right amount to sort of nudge them in the right direction.
Yeah,
I think that's really unique.
That's a really good balance. Jenna?
Hello. I don't have a Jenna example, but I did want to mention something to touch on what you've just said, Maya, because I think your game's really interesting because it does so much environmental storytelling. And we were talking the other day, and there's something about, like, when you go to a museum, you can see historical artifacts. When you watch a period drama, there's the set dressing, which is, normally immaculate. But you're not focusing on that, you're focusing on the characters. But there's something kind of unique about, VR experiences in that period setting and the opportunities for storytelling. I'm thinking about the shoes.
Yeah, so basically one of the things that I found so exciting about doing this in VR specifically is that obviously it's a different time period as well as a different geographical setting. And I think you kind of have an idea of what 19th century China might have looked like, but I think it's so different. One of the objects we have in the game is a lotus shoe, because that was a period when a lot of women still had bound feet. And being able to pick it up, this tiny little shoe, like that's the first time I think a lot of my friends who sort of knew about it got to see the scale of it, and you get to like flip it around in your hand. And I think that just brought it to life in a completely different way. So I think, again, just heroing objects, and getting, especially for kids, I think bringing history to life in a way like that, allowing them to actually take things and like try to see how they work, it's so exciting and fun. And I think even for me, like I've never been able to pick up some of these amazing treasures. So doing the research and designing all of that, and again, working with the designers and artists to make the best experience for the player, I think that's so special. And as a writer, you often don't get to do that in other mediums.
Yeah,
so
that's great. Maybe this is a good time for you to talk about your games that moved you.
Yes.
If we can move on to that slide, please. Please.
Yeah, so I grew up mainly in Hong Kong, and I played a lot of games, and one of which I'd like to talk about is it's called Chinese Paladin, or The Legend of Sword and Fairy in English. And it's this amazing wuxia sort of game, which is like a Chinese martial arts fantasy genre. I love it, and this is actually why like most of the Chinese that I can read is all like terms like that, like seven maiden sword and things. But I just loved how it sort of brought this world to life, and you just really immerse yourself into this thing. And I just thought it really brought me closer to my culture, and again, allowing me agency to play that through and feel a part of it was so exciting. And the other game is Zelda, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which, I don't know, it was such a wonderful, exciting experience. You are this little boy who sort of travels through time and grows up, and you have to sort of, solve the problems of this world against, it's just really epic and mythical. And I think this was the first time you had anything that resembled, like, a world as open as this. And again, you had this little fairy sort of helping you a little bit, and there was this music element, but it was just the imagination of it. And that brings me to my games as an adult. And Breath of the Wild. So again, this is Zelda 20 years later, and I think the first time that you sort of wake up and you wake up in this little cave, and then you come out into the platform and you just see Hyrule, and they do this amazing panning shot. And I literally just burst into tears because I was like, I'm so happy to be back here. You know, like it feels like home, and it looks amazing. And for the first time, you can really travel everywhere you can see. Which is also something I loved in The Witcher, which I genuinely think is just one of the best adaptations across all time. Like, I've read the short stories, I've read the novels, and I think they just brought all the elements that really excite you to life in this world. And I think they improved some of the stuff and just really made it feel so fun and engaging. And again, you feel so epic because you get to play Geralt, this amazing Witcher, and your morality makes a difference. And I think that's always incredibly satisfying when choices that you make as a player have an impact on the game world. And then my third game, I just really wanted to give a shout out to like visual novels and specifically otome games. They're this Japanese subgenre of essentially dating games. But you sort of read them, and then every now and then you get a choice, and depending on the choices that you make, you sort of end up closer to one of like the super handsome bachelors or bachelorettes, and you get this lovely, lovely romance. And I think it's just amazing to have, you know, a game genre that is so aimed at women and aimed at young people. And there's there's all sorts of games within that genre. So this one, you play a girl who really wants to go to this amazing drama school, but it's an all-boys school, so you have to like cross-dress, and then you have to sort of pass as a boy, and then obviously like, you know, the 7 super handsome guys sort of eventually figure it out, but you have to like go and do these plays that are amazing, and it's just full of like, it's got a rhythm game section, so it's called Jack Jan. I really recommend it. You can play it on Switch, but it goes to show how much of a range there is within games, and I think that one, yes, it has art, yes, it has voice acting, but at its heart, it's something that is really driven by narrative, and that's something all of us, you know, are in charge of and that we can do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So it would be good to briefly talk about the different kind of roles, because I think there's a few terms that have come up, you know, narrative designer, some of the differences between the roles in gaming and TV. I think Jenna's got some interesting things to say, if I can...
Yes, I, Jenna Jovi, do have some interesting things to say about this.
Thank you.
So the first thing to say is that these terms, kind of narrative designer and game writer, they can often be used interchangeably, or more confusingly, you can be labelled as one but be actually doing the job of the other. So a game writer is usually responsible for fleshing out the game's story, its characters, and the world in terms of any history or lore, writing any in-game content. So that could be what's called barks of a non-player character. So barks are just, you know, quick lines like "ow" or "stop touching me" or whatever it is. I'm thinking of sorry.
Always play that game, Trevor.
Just let me be very specific. I'm thinking about Warcraft 2 when you used to click the little little gangs, and they had a range of barks that were like "stop clicking on me." Sorry, Jenna. I was supposed to be sat there. I want that clear for the record. So also it might be the text of a book that you might find in, you know, a game like Starfield, or, you know, big cinematic cutscenes, almost like, you know, snippets of a linear episode in something like Red Dead Redemption. In really big kind of narrative AAA games, you might also get a similar structure to TV, where there's a lead writer running a writer's room with other game writers trying to break stories across, you know, multiple story threads, very similar to TV. So a narrative designer is usually responsible for working out how the story is told. So where the narrative intersects with the gameplay and the mechanics. So that usually is being involved from the very beginning of the game, building the experience of the narrative into how, you know, we as players move through the game. So there's a lot of challenge to that, a lot of puzzling, kind of fitting it all together. So for Ghostbusters, we knew we had some linear story we wanted to deliver, but we also knew we had an online multiplayer game, which meant that we could be teamed up with people who were at different points in that linear story to where we were. So the design challenge was how we could make the narrative experience feel consistent for all of those players. In Summerhill, the other game I showed earlier, we don't have any dialogue and there's very limited character animations. So with those restrictions, how do we best tell our story? So that was considering other things like the environmental storytelling, where the camera might focus as we come in and out of a scene, points of interest on the horizon that you can see, adding in cutscenes. Often a level designer, different role, will ask what the narrative designer or the writer wants the player to be feeling as they move through that level. So, guiding those other disciplines and understanding what they need from you is key, and audio often plays a big role in that, as well as kind of driving the pacing of the game. But yes, smaller games will just, might only have one narrative designer doing both jobs or one game writer doing both jobs, but you can easily be in larger teams with multiple people in all of those specialisms.
Brilliant. I want to keep us moving, but just is anything to add to that briefly in terms of the different roles and the
I would
titles?
say, we were talking about this earlier, but it's a narrative designer can be a difficult job to sort of apply for. It's often handled in-house by studios, because I think a lot of the time someone has an idea for a game and then that will sort of dictate the narrative. So it's not something that I think that you can really work towards as easily as some other jobs.
Yeah, I think it's more of a technical role.
Right.
And there are some resources that we can talk about later in terms of things you can look at.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one. You kind of almost stumble into it. You find your way through it.
Yeah.
Because you are, as a narrative designer, is working very closely with the other kind of developer roles within the team, whereas the writer will be probably much more of an overview, owning the kind of the overview, owning the steel thread of the story, and making sure that always hits the emotional points. Really, I mean, it's something with Grand Getaway. That was my main role with it. We had some help that came in halfway through in terms of a narrative designer who was working on all the kind of little bits, putting that prophecy bit. I know we needed something like that, but I kind of almost had Grace as a second unit working on that.
So they're working out the lore, the background, the
all
backstory,
of that. Definitely.
all of that.
So working to a brief from me.
Yeah.
And then it was great. So I could kind of throw ideas at her, and then she would come back with lots of kind of details around, as well as also things that didn't make it into the final game, like where you could scan different aliens or different characters or flora and fauna, and she was writing a lot of backstory for that. So it was contextual. It wasn't necessarily the mechanics of narrative design, but it was really important. And I really wanted to get that in.
Yeah, Maya.
I'll keep it brief because I know you want to move us on. But so in our case, we were a really small team. So I was the narrative designer and writer sort of by default. But we started off with only one level, and that was a demo. And that won a prize at Raindance, which is what got us funding to the next stage. But essentially the stage in between is that we had to pitch what the full game would look like. So Eloise came to me and said, well, what else do you think would be great? And because I'd done the research and I knew that world really well, I just sort of pitched a number of things I thought would be really fun levels based on what excited me about the history. So then we took that forward and just pitched those as potential levels, a really vague idea of what you might be doing in them. And as we got into development, it was then myself, Eloise, the director, and the game designer who sat down and sort of figured out this level lends itself to that. How can we build that into the main thread? And how can we create an emotional arc and really just use them for the most impact?
Yeah, that's great. Lovely. Let's move on, Finbar. Let's move on to your. I'll try and keep us moving. But yeah, it'd be lovely to hear about the games that moved you.
Yeah, sure. So, well, here we go. You can see from the graphics where we are.
We've gone back in time.
We've gone back in time. So, the lower left-hand side, I think that's really kind of where games started for me. It was the Fighting Fantasy books. There was the first book called Warlock of Firetop Mountain, and that led to tons of these books. It was written by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson. And obviously, Ian Livingstone went on to be a founder member of IDOS and a key figure in the gaming community. They're book form, but you're playing with the dice. At some point, they evolved them in a reprint, so you could flick through the pages and you have little dice icons at the bottom of the pages, so you could be playing this on the school bus. And they were incredibly addictive. But they were prose written there. They had maybe a few illustrations here and there, and you were completely and utterly immersed in this world. The top left is Hampstead, which you can still get emulators for, or you can go to find it on YouTube, which is kind of just before the session, kind of apprising myself of how wonderful it is. It's a text adventure, which I loved in the sense that, but this one is a satire of British society. You not only had to get to Hampstead, you had to attain Hampstead.
Wow.
And so you start off in a dingy bedsit with a single bulb and kind of rotting things in the fridge. And you start to explore your bedsit, go east, open door, open fridge, find your way outside, and it evolves from there. You start to meet other people. But I think what I really loved about it was that sitting there in almost kind of a DOS setup, right, where you're inputting commands, is that the story was alive. I could try things. Some things would work, some things wouldn't. But there was a huge surprise when things did. Over on the right is very iconic Elite, which was designed for the BBC Micro. And if you don't know about this game, go and find out about it. I mean, it was groundbreaking in terms of what it did with the setup of that machine at the time. And I think why I wanted to bring it here is because it is about a fully defined universe. I think around about the same time I was devouring Frank Herbert's Dune and completely obsessed with that book in terms of how detailed it was and about how it immersed you in that story in every single level. And I think Elite did similar things to my brain, essentially. And then, moving on to kind of what inspired me as an adult. This is a game called Shadow of Colossus, where you are in this very cinematic, sweeping, beautiful landscape, but very strange setup where you have to go and hunt down these different giants and monsters, and you kill them. You're kind of having to work things out as you go. But the reason why I wanted to bring this in is that it kind of goes back to those fighting fantasy books, right, which were exploding my mind and lighting my imagination about you being a hero in this fantasy world. But I think also it was doing all of those things, but also it was doing something really powerful with storytelling, whereby as you progress through the story and you're killing these big, terrifying creatures, you start to learn that maybe you're not necessarily the hero. And that there's another aspect to this story, and it's incredibly powerful, incredibly moving. And those are the...
Yeah,
that's
that's amazing. I mean, that feels like the difference between the first slide and the second slide is unimaginable, isn't it? I mean, that's extraordinary. That's brilliant, thank you. So I'll make sure that we've got time for questions at the end. So do have a think if there's anything that you'd like to ask our brilliant panel. But just sort of getting into practicalities, paths into the industry, for the TV writers here, what are their next steps if they're interested? How would they think about applying their skills to the games world?
First off, I have to give a shout out to the Writers Guild, because the Writers Guild also covers games, and I think it's really helpful to go along. There is at least one yearly games writers meetup, and that's something I attended a couple of years ago, and I think it's just really helpful to talk to other people and hear what they're doing, because I think we talked about this. You got to play games, first of all. You got to love games. And I think find the people who are like you, who enjoy this and want to dedicate their time to it. And I think it's one of those things where you just have to network. And it's not scary, because I think if you just go and chat to people about the things you both enjoy, you will naturally find the people who want to do the same things that you do.
Definitely. And there's a very inspiring writer called Greg Buchanan, who I follow. He writes for a site called Writing Interactive. He does his own courses for things like that, which are paid, not that expensive, but it's interesting to go into an 11-week course to learn the very basics. You can be at any level. He also writes articles about games. And he worked on No Man's Sky, his BAFTA award-winning game. He's worked on lots of different things. But he's very inspiring. He's there to give you feedback, and especially if you manage to get on the course, you'll be in a critique situation with other writers. and you're all learning your craft. You're learning how to put your game together and make mistakes and rebuild things again, because that's an essential part of writing. You have to redraft. Writing is rewriting. You have to do it in order to get to that point and find the heart of something, find the fun, find the soul of what you're trying to do. And there are also tools that you can use like Twine and Ink, which are free storytelling, interactive storytelling tools.
So tell us about that. How does that work then? You can create your own mini games.
It's basically a branching software, so it helps you track like choices you make. So if you write a certain thing, and it'll branch off, and I think at the most basic level, you just begin to learn to think that way.
Yeah.
And it just helps you have an overview of like how the story might develop. And again, I think it just encourages people to just make. I think it's really important. You don't need the fancy graphics. You don't need to have all of that. Just write like a text-based adventure if that's all you feel comfortable with to begin with, because I think even just doing that and finding someone maybe to put that into code so you can just play through, even if you just click through, it's really fun. And I think as writers in TV, you have so little agency, it feels sometimes, to get things made. But this you can do. And I think you can just get it in front of an audience right away. It might be simple, but it's something you'll have made. And I think that's a really rewarding feeling.
Definitely, and there are things like ChatGPT. I mean, you can write you can search for them. There are people that are writing prompts for text-based adventures. I've done a few myself, working with another game studio, and we started off going back to that.
Did it look like the teletext version? Yeah,
absolutely. Going back to, because you give it a prompt framework, you tell it how long you want the duration of that game to last. You might have Easter eggs that you can put in that prompt and certain bits and pieces, but you can find these out, and that's a really good way, I think, of learning as well. If you don't fancy the look of Twine or Ink, you can go out and play around with ChatGPT.
That just maybe shifts your mindset from thinking about a linear situation, moving it to more towards games.
I would just jump in and really echo that and really hammer home that you don't need to know how to code. I don't know how to code. I can't do a lot of the techie stuff, but you can absolutely use something like Ink on Inkle, INKLE website. It's got a lovely interface. You just start typing. It's much nicer than Final Draft, and you can immediately start.
Most things are. Let's be fair.
But the thing about the text events, like the Hampstead example, and the kind of thing you can just make now through these kind of website interfaces, it gets you thinking about that agency, the verbs, the doing. It exposes that really vividly, so you can just start practicing finding your storytelling voice or applying your storytelling voice to it straight away. And I was just going to say as well, there's also something interesting about, you were talking around kind of like using it as a kind of backdoor pilot for IP as well, I think.
Yes, I think it's really important to consider it. I think be cautious about it, like be intentional. I don't think it's, I can't make it as a film, let's just do a game. I think make sure it's an idea that suits itself as a game. But the thing is, games has so many different genres, so many ways of interacting. You probably will find a way to make an idea work in a specific type of game. And it's, have a thing. I think you can do a graphic novel, you can do a novel, but you could also do a game. And I think a game, again, by being interactive, is something that gets people really excited. And just imagine if you go into a pitch meeting and you have something that can be played on an iPad, and it's like, this is what it feels like, just one level. I think it just puts you in a slightly different level to other people. It makes you stand out a bit. But also, I just want to mention there are a lot of festivals and things you can attend. Oh, yeah. So there is the London Games Festival, and part of that is WASD. They also have sort of like networking events where you can just go, anyone can go, and you can just talk to other people, because I do think networking and just learning that way is really vital.
Yeah.
One last shout out. I would also recommend, it's a bit left field, but it's particular to this. There's an incredible book called Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zavine, and her new one is out. But that book is not only a fantastically written book, but it's also about why people make games and finding the emotion of games. And so I would thoroughly recommend that.
Great.
And putting my Jenna Jovi hat back on for a moment, she wants me to stress that, in practical terms, LinkedIn is where a lot of games jobs get advertised, and crucially, recruiters are super active for the games industry and looking for kind of game writers on LinkedIn. So make yourself look shiny and open to work on there, and just put game writer once you're feeling ready to start looking for game writer jobs, so that recruiters can kind of pick you up. And, just like with any writing, you will get many, many rejections. But, writers are used to that. And, the first gig won't be, the epic Shadow of the Colossus, kind of game. But that's okay, right? And the other thing Jenna wanted to say was, if you're already a storyteller, especially if you're a screenwriter or a novelist, and you know how to tell a gripping and engaging story across many hours, create complex characters and worlds with depth as well as breadth, you're probably better than most working games writers at the moment.
That's cold.
I slightly paraphrased that, actually. That's not fair. That's not exactly what she said. You're already well on your way to becoming a great games writer. Don't quote Jenna on that. That last bit was me riffing, which I shouldn't have done, really. But truthfully, that is amazing. Like, if you're a storyteller, you're a storyteller. It's just another medium. So, get out there.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. Perhaps this is a good point to move on to Jenna's games that moved her.
There's Jenna. So these are Jenna's games that moved her, which as a child, she played a lot of games as a kid, but nothing possessed her quite as much as
There's like a murmur there when that came
Lemmings.
out, by the way. Yeah.
Spent an unholy amount of time puzzling over the best way to save those little guys. It was both an early lesson in utilitarian ethics and great game design, because I was genuinely invested in their story, albeit a very simple life or death one. I played loads of this as well, and I wouldn't have found another version to play it again while I was making the deck, 'cause it still holds up. And then as an adult for Jenna, this is a game called Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. And this game caught her like she's never been caught before. It's about to get spoiled massively, but it gets to the core of what makes great narrative design. So you play as two brothers. You're on a quest to find a cure for their ailing father in a magical land. Each brother is controlled on a separate side of a single joypad. So one side for one brother, one side for the other, and it's got kind of unique co-op gameplay abilities. So, for example, the older brother can swim, and the younger can't. So certain puzzles you need to be controlling the older brother to do things, or the younger. As you spend time with them, you very much get used to controlling both brothers simultaneously, and a sense of their individual characters and their relationship with each other. They speak in a sort of Sims-like gibberish, so it's mostly storytelling without words. At the story's climax, and this is the big spoiler, the older brother dies. And the way the game's mechanics play out is that half of the controller goes dark, the half that controlled the older brother, because he's not there. And you feel that loss so keenly as the younger brother, because he's literally, not there to help you anymore. So that fusion of the game mechanics with the characters and the story, and how it makes you feel when you play it through, that's just incredible. And Jenna aspires to that height in everything she works on. And she says deprecatingly, and she fails, but I don't think she does. So yeah, those are the games that moved her.
That is extraordinary. When you said about that earlier, that's a real gut punch, isn't it? Half of the controller goes dark? Oh my God, so you are literally trying to move about in the world with part of you missing those skills. I mean, that feels like that sort of quite neatly sums up what you've both been talking about in terms of marrying that activity, that agency with emotion. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, I think you have to care. I mean, I think that's the main job of a writer in any medium, really. We've talked about finding the heart of things, finding the fun of it, and it takes time to do that. In games, you're working with. It's good because you're not just on your own. Your particular role or particular coalface will be the kind of the writing of the story and owning that. But you're working as a team. So everybody will contribute to it, and that's important too, because you're then also, once you find the heart of it, you've got you're kind of all running together, and you can see evidence of that in all of these games.
Yeah, Maya.
I think that's what's so wonderful about games is, remember, it's a really special relationship to your audience. I think it's maybe more direct than other forms, because I think you are crafting an experience for the player. Like, that's one person, and you want to make sure that they really get something like moving or amusing, whatever it is, but you're making something quite directly and shaping it around one person. I think that gives you a lot of responsibility, but it's also a real chance to just make something special for someone, and I think that's really rewarding.
Yeah. And that's what I've really taken from it in terms of writing for TV drama, writing for kids. I know the writers are all passionately thinking about what is that 10-year-old at home thinking, feeling, what are they going through? So it feels like a really relatable mechanism that a lot of our TV writers are already going to be across. Trevor?
I just wanted to say, perhaps somewhat less positively, but just honestly, the games industry is not this like sunny upland of just endless opportunity.
Oh, Trevor!
I'm sorry. I just wanted to be, like all the creative industries, it's got its struggles at the moment. There are, layoffs, redundancies happening, across the industry, despite, in some ways it never being more popular or as large an industry. And, I think those of us in our various sectors can all kind of relate to that. So, I think certainly why we wanted to do this session, and the exec Nigel, he came up with the idea of it, was that, he wanted to give video games some visibility today, and also hopefully give everybody, a chance to potentially broaden the opportunities that they offer. And as the sort of different sectors kind of wax and wane, hopefully, we can all kind of rise together, I guess.
Yeah. Can I just add something really quickly, which is that I think a lot of the times people feel like, oh, it's screen time. It's like it's not great for my kid to just be playing games. But I think there is a huge difference between a child engaging with a narrative and a story with intense focus for an hour versus scrolling through TikTok for an hour. It's a completely different thing. So I think there's real value in educational things as well, but just emotionally growing empathy. There's lots of positives to gaming.
You're literally in someone else's shoes, aren't you? You are, yeah.
And I would also add to that yes, we're going through, like all media, there's interesting times at the moment, but the thing that I like that goes right back to that kid inputting, I wonder what this will do when I type this in, and the machine is giving something back, that gives you that hair in the back of the neck feeling. Yeah. It's still there with whether I'm playing something on a Switch that's just come out, or the new Switch that's coming, or the Apple Vision Pro, albeit it's quite expensive, but it's a testament to evolving technology, and there are other platforms that are adding to this wonderful kind of gaming world. So there are other new ways of telling those stories. We didn't have, Maya and I working on our first VR. That wasn't there 5-6 years ago.
So there are new, it's ever evolving. There are new
ever
platforms.
evolving. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to throw it over to you guys. If there's anything, someone straight away with a hand up there. Thank you very much. There's a mic on its way to you. Thank you.
Hello there. Fascinating talk. Thank you very much. I'm Banks from Banks & Wag, music composers. That has nothing to do with the question I'm about to ask. I'm really interested in the plotting. I'm probably a similar vintage to you, Finmar, in that I grew up on BBC Master text-based adventure games. But they were at least, for all you had different pathways, they were sort of finite. And I'm interested in this open world of gaming that now exists. How do you plot? What does the plotting look like on the page where there are so many potential options of where to go? Is there the illusion of choice, or is there true free choice in how you navigate your way through the story?
Good question.
I think that depends on your budget.
Yeah.
I think certainly for VR, you're probably dealing with an illusion of choice because it's difficult, and there's only so many angles you can only plot for as well. It's quite technical. I think if you're doing something more traditional, then even then there is an end, unless you're doing something that is procedurally generated, like No Man's Sky, then yes, you could do something, but that means you are sort of giving in the really tailored experience. So it's sort of like you make a choice what suits your world. If you just want something that is going on forever, which is exciting in its own way, you might not have as much detail that has been really thought about and crafted, but you have a different experience. So it sort of depends on your budget, your time, but also the end result.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I haven't worked on big open world projects, not that I wouldn't like to one day, but I certainly played them. But I can only talk about my experience, something like Wallace and Gromit, is that it's really important to get the peaks and troughs. So there's the same traditional sense of what is the scenario, what is the kind of, could you explain it to somebody? You're probably going to have to stand up and present it to an exec or an audience member, that kind of thing. So can I summarize it? Does that seem exciting as a paragraph kind of, so that, and in there would be the DNA of your plot. And once you start to map that out, whether it be bits of paper, whiteboards, don't worry about the kind of the medium in that sense. You still thinking these things through in terms of pacing and peaks and troughs. Where is going to be the darkest moment? Where is going to be the moment of inciting incident? Where is going to be the kind of the climax and all that kind of stuff? For those they are the same kind of techniques. And with something like Wallace and Gromit, I referred things like the Fabula cards. Do you know the Fabula cards, which are very useful in terms of plotting out hero's journey and the kind of the DNA again of that narrative, and those that would be something to look out for, because it
same
means,
kind of structure, but just maybe you're not in control of when people get there. Or,
exactly. Yeah, because emotionally, imaginatively, you still need to, whether it's The Witcher or a silly adventure with Wallace and Gromit, you still need those purchase points. You know what I mean, in terms of and keeping true to those. So. Yeah.
Great, that's great.
Just to add, you've probably felt it yourself if you are a gamer. It's like you can play something like The Witcher a really long time, like I have, but I feel you can sort of divert from the main plot and just do like little mini tasks. You know, you can do monster hunts, whatever, but you won't get that progression of plot. And I think sometimes if you have too much of that, the world is too open, but you don't have that narrative driving you forward, you can lose interest, or it can be hard to get back into the main quest. So I think it's always a toss-up, and you just have to know what you want to deliver.
Great, great. Have we got time for maybe one last quick question? Chap here. Thank you.
Hello, sorry, excuse the croaky voice this morning. Just a very quick question. In terms of, so Maya, I know you said that you're sort of the primary writer on your one, but in huge games, sort of things like Baldur's Gate 3, I'm thinking of, are there writers' rooms for that sort of level, and how many writers get involved as sort of games get bigger, or is it primarily one writer that ends up writing for every aspect of those sort of games?
It was lots of writers in Baldur's Gate, and I think how it tends to happen is that one writer gets the main stewardship of a character. I feel like you have one writer who is in charge of, someone's journey, and then you sort of, I'm sure you have lots of writers doing all the item descriptions, etc. But I think you have one writer who is in charge of one character, and then they will obviously collaborate. Yeah.
And Dark Souls games follow the same setup. They have teams and people that own a character's arc and that can track it in that certain way, because they are going to be complex when it comes down to it. But I think it also gives it that richness, because if other writers are owning certain characters or certain bits of backstory, you're getting a lovely kind of mixture, the kind of tapestry of voices that are going on.
I'm getting one more sign here. Is there one last question before we head off? Oh my gosh.
Over there.
Somebody over there. Hello. Somebody over there. We'll have to be super quick. One-word answers.
Okay. So for my final year project, I'm working on a virtual reality game. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the future of VR? Because in like 20 years, it's not as popular as AR. So what do you think?
Good question. Wow, Maya.
Expanding. I think as the headgears, as we get new models, the older ones will become cheaper. You will get easier access, but I think at the moment, definitely aim to go to the festivals, aim to go to the trade shows, like get your thing seen by people. That's the best way forward at the moment. Yeah. This might change in future, but I think for now, make sure you get it to the people who have the headsets to make sure your work is seen.
What she said.
Brilliant. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I ask you to thank our panel. Tea and coffee, sponsored by Omen Studios, is available in the bar and across the road. If you haven't already, don't forget to download the CMC app, sponsored by S4C. And coming up next in here is From Screen to Stage at 11 o'clock. Can I please ask you to thank my brilliant panel, Finbar, Maya, and Jenna, also known as Trevor Klein, our brilliant producer. Thanks also to Exec Nigel. And thanks so much for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Yes, thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy, yeah.